I'm going to be talking about analytics on the Corda node using Python and specifically an open source framework that I rolled out a couple of weeks ago. Just a quick bio, my background: I run a company called Chainhaus. We're based in New York City. I flew in this morning for this event. We do education. We have advanced Corda classes. We do development. We have developers. And we run a large number of events in New York City related to blockchain and AI. Last year we did probably 40 events just in New York City. And I teach at Columbia Business School, NYU, and at CUNY I teach graduate level blockchain, AI, and machine learning subjects, both technical and on the business side. And we're working on two products called Flow Ledger and Design Assets. If you're ever in New York City, I recommend you stop by and take a look at some of our events. This is linked to our meetup if you're in town. And I'm also writing the O'Reilly book for Corda. And when I signed the contract to do this book, I was elated. Now I have to deal with the ordeal of actually writing it, which is fun. I'm learning a lot, which is great. A couple of things I want to cover. One is that blockchain overall, the trajectory is that there will be significant work and attention needed to interoperation between different blockchains, right? And then second is the data that's going to be accumulated on these blockchains will become significant. So this year and last year we were in the kind of the POC phase, and then next year we're going to are mostly moving towards an adoption phase. A lot of enterprises are figuring out how do we adopt this and move it into production. And I think 2 years out, we'll have these interop issues. How do I interop? And then I have all this data. How do I look into this data and make sense of it? How do I derive business value from this data that I'm looking at, right? So I would need things like predictive analytics. If I'm building a letter of credit system, I want to know, for example, if I issue a letter of credit to party X, when do I expect them to sign that letter of credit, right? What is my expectation? How can I employ machine learning algorithms to kind of give me analytics around the transaction that I'm doing? Or if I'm issuing an asset and I think I'm going to have a buyer for this asset, can I price the asset based on that buyer's past performance and behavior, right? And then frameworks like Corda, this is kind of out of scope for Corda, and there'll be tools that need to be able to accomplish these kind of things. And same thing with detecting fraud. I'm using machine learning to look for anomalies in the data to detect, hey, this transaction doesn't look right, and possibly take action against that, right? Out of the box, there's nothing that will do that today. Tableau and Hadoop and Spark have their limitations in what they can do. Tableau is not something that you can slap onto a blockchain system. Spark and Hadoop are more tied to streaming data than analytics. So what do data scientists use, right? So I teach a lot of data scientists, probably 200-300 data scientists a year. And you'd be surprised how technology is not something that they fully understand. A lot of data scientists don't know how to use Docker. And they're very foreign to, Java is very foreign to them. So occasionally you'll have somebody who's coming from the enterprise space who wants to be a data scientist, and they may have the Java experience, but newly minted data scientists typically don't have JVM experience. And forget about Kotlin. A lot of them have not even heard the word Kotlin, and a lot of them have heard Scala but are very scared of Scala, right? It's very complex for them, right? So what do data scientists use? They use R, and R is falling out of favor, but Python is gaining significant traction in the market, specifically around predictive analytics and machine learning. And why is that? The barrier to entry is fairly low. You can learn Python if you've got some technical background within a week or two. You can be doing machine learning probably within a month. And if you look at this chart from The Economist, you can see this dark red line shooting up, and that's Python's adoption. And then if you know about the TOB index, Python is in third place, right? Java is still king, but Python's adoption and its rise to even get into the top 5 is a meteoric rise. It's indicative of the fact that if we want to see Corda to be adopted in more places than we are kind of used to, we might want to build bridges into other languages. And so Python is an example of that. And then Python is being mandated in a lot of these financial firms. This is an article from Financial Times. JP Morgan is requiring a bunch of their interns and their new hires to learn Python, right? So Python is kind of replacing the Excel spreadsheet. So to preempt some of this analytical work that we foresee coming, I as my company and the students that I talk to, right, we created a framework called PyCorda. It's open source, it's free. You just go to pycorda.com, and it will allow you to quickly and instantly access your node data, right, and start to perform analytics on it, right? So it's useful to do analytics, it's useful for management and monitoring, and you don't have to spin up a JVM for that. You can just open up Python, and within 3 lines of code, you're connected and you're pulling data down, and you can analyze that data, right? So very simple example, if I take the obligation Corda app, which is a part of one of the samples, Corda apps, and I set the H2 to the H2 database to this port, all I need to do is type in this 3 lines of code, and I've connected to the node, and I've queried the node infos table that sits inside the node, right? So right now, this PyCorda only supports H2, but eventually will support all the other major databases, including Postgres, right? And if I do execute this code, I'll get the data, and I can pull this data constantly. I can then parse this data and manipulate it if I need to do it or monitor it, right? And same thing here. If I want to get the node info host table, 1 line of code, and I get the entire table, right? If I want to pull linear states, I can do the same thing. If I'm going to issue, let's say I use the obligation Corda app, I issue an obligation. I can then, and I'll get this linear ID as a confirmation once I hit create obligation. I get this linear ID, which is up here with the B0A. I can then immediately pull it via code, and I will get that transaction data pulled out, right? So just 1 line of code, and I can do it in a REPL mode. I can just kind of keep typing it while transactions are coming, and I can kind of pull that data. We have access to all the tables, right? So for every table that's in the database, I can make calls and pull that data in, right? And these are all the available functions for the different types of data I can pull. I can also pull in data from the vault, right? The different states, the linear states, the fungible states. I can even pull in key store data. So I've got my private keys. I can pull that in. So I just make a simple call here, and I'll get the keys, and I can then use the keys if I need to do whatever I need to do with the keys. I can also dump the entire database with 1 line of code. I can dump the entire database and take a snapshot, and it goes into a flat file, and I can look through that, and I can dump it again. I can issue this command twice in a row, and then I can do a diff if I want to do a diff, evaluate transactions, right? And then we're building out search capabilities. You'll be able to search transactions by linear ID and so on and so forth. You'll be able to search by contract state, the name of a contract. Let's say cache state. I want to pull up all the states that are cache state. I can be able to search that. And this will grow significantly over the coming months and become a little bit more sophisticated in terms of its depth of search. And if your node has a REST API, we make it very easy. You just set the URL for the API, and then you make a direct call, and you're able to call that API. With the obligation Corda app, there is a REST API for that, and all you have to do is just plug in the REST URL. PyCorda underneath uses a library called Pandas. How many people here have data science backgrounds? Okay, like 3. Okay, so there's a library called Pandas, and there is no equivalent of this library in any other language. It's extremely powerful. It actually came out of a hedge fund. So this guy named Wes McKinney wrote this library called Pandas, very powerful in its data analytics capability. And there's a data structure called data frame. You can think of it as an SQL table on steroids. Every time I query the database, I have a copy of that query, the result of that query in memory on the client side. If I make changes to the client side, it does not reflect back to the server. I can manipulate and modify data on my side, right? So I can filter it, I can select columns, I can clean it, I can append stuff to it. I can even chart right off of that within 1 or 2 lines of code. I can chart, let's say I want to chart a time series in terms of the value of a specific state. I want to see the time series of that. You can do that with 2 or 3 lines of code, right? And here's an example of I want to do a time series for a fungible cache state. And with those 3 lines of code, I'll get a chart that shows the change of quantity. This reflects 3 transactions conducted with cache state. So a cache on the ledger was created, it was used, it was moved around, and I can kind of track my balance on that. Also, it's possible to push this same time series with 1 line of code. I can push it to Plotly, which is a cloud-based charting solution. I don't need to generate the charts on my laptop. I want to push it out to the cloud and share it, and share a link with 1 line of code. I can kind of push it out, and it's out there. And this is an example of the Plotly, the same graph, but this is on the cloud on the Plotly servers using the Chart Studio. We also built in driver management, messing around with the h2.jar, which is a jar file for the h2 driver. If you want to pull the driver down yourself, you can pull it manually, or you can just use 1 line of code, and it will pull down the latest version or whatever version you specify. And typically you run this code only once, but it's done automatically for you. And you can check the file system. If the jar doesn't exist, you pull it down. Installation is simple. If you want to install this and you already have Python, a 64-bit version, you just do pip install PyCorda, and you have all these features available to you. Right? 3 minutes. Okay. Our next version should be coming out in December. We will have log analysis, meaning you'll be able to use regular expressions to filter and kind of tail, using a tail thing for logs. So you want to monitor your logs and you want to see specific things. We're going to put in support for queryable states, that you can kind of search across those and do time series charts on queryable states. And we were talking earlier today regarding deserializing states from the database and putting them into Python objects and making them available, read-only, of course. And then some database cleanup kind of stuff, like there's a transaction message ID table that gets just really full and it's useless. You don't really need it. It can be truncated. And managing that can be done all on Python. Thank you.
Time to spare. Okay, so does anyone have any questions?
How are you planning to manage deserialization of the Corda objects?
There's some libraries that do some of that stuff for us. So, and Mike and I were talking about it earlier today, that I feel like it's complex, and there are going to be some cracks in how it does it, but something that we have to figure out. So there are libraries that are out there that do that, taking a byte stream and then it knows that it's encoded in the Java format and then pulls it, and then you have to convert it. We have to put in the code to convert it into Python objects. So it's a little bit of work. It's probably the hardest of these things here to do. And the queryable states, we got to figure out, should we scan a jar file and find the queryable states and then look it up in the database, or does the user tell us the name of the tables? And that's something we have to figure out. So do we use introspection and things like that? Yeah.
What's the reason not support other database at the moment?
I'm lazy. That's it's time. I have enough things to do, but yeah. Well, H2 was difficult because H2 does not have I don't think there's a JDBC driver for H2. So I think it was, no, actually there is, but it was a little bit difficult to get. H2 doesn't have a driver. We had to use a different driver to get H2 connectivity. Then once we got that, then the question is, how do we know what database we're going to be connecting to? So we got to put that in. We're trying to make it like seamless, so you don't even have to specify what database it is. But yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Is there any demo of your predictive analysis that we can have a look into?
The predictive analysis, we're going to put in the machine learning stuff shortly. Right now I'm going to put in a logistic regression. That's going to go in first, and then we're going to play around with it and see what happens. So I think that will be out by December, the machine learning pieces.
Okay, thank you.